For those of us who don't know on the call, can you talk a little bit about the work that you do and the work of Centennial Parkside CDC, just as a general primer on the work you guys have been doing?
Absolutely. And like I said, I feel fortunate to have other members of my organization on this. So every once in a while, I will hand off to my board president, Alexander McFadden, who is on this as well, to kind of add some richness to the conversation as well. So I just wanted you all be prepared for that. But like Andrew said, I am the executive director of the Centennial Parkside Community Development Corporation. And my role in a nutshell at the organization is to implement the vision of my board. My board develops our strategic planning, develops our vision, and I'm at the service of the board to help to implement the vision, to work with the board to implement that vision. I'm governed by a board of trustees that consists of 8 members right now, primarily residents of the East Parkside neighborhood or representatives from institutions in the East Parkside neighborhood. So we're very grassroots, very locally represented. And I manage all the day-to-day operations of the organization. So what that means is I do everything from maintaining our office space to meeting with, political leadership to coordinate projects and programs in our neighborhood, which makes this job awesome because I get to do such a diversity of things working for a smaller startup nonprofit. As an urban planner, this is a dream because it's doing the most grassroots, meaningful work that I feel like an urban planner can possibly do. And I've worked in a lot of different urban planning roles through my time, and I have to say that this is by far the most meaningful. I'm surrounded by an amazing group of people here. I have an amazing board of trustees and amazing staff who work alongside me each and every day and who brought just what I see as a brilliant vision to the revitalization of East Parkside, and a really interesting strategy for doing that I hope to get into a little bit during this conversation. But Andrew, you also asked, about, what is the Centennial Parkside Community Development Corporation? So I feel like I described kind of my role within the organization. So I can give you kind of the generic sense of what we are from our mission, vision, and so forth, which I will do. So we are, like many community development corporations across, the city and across the country, we have a mission to preserve, promote, and revitalize our neighborhood, which is East Parkside, through partnerships with businesses and institutions and programs that engage residents, increase opportunity, and grow a diverse, thriving community. And we do this through a lot of the same ways that a lot of other community development corporations do this. We have very specific goals, such as preserving and promoting affordable housing in the neighborhood, building a more thriving commercial corridor in the neighborhood, cleaning and greening of the neighborhood. So a lot of basic services that supplement city services. So street cleaning, which isn't even a city service, as we know, because there is no current street cleaning in Philadelphia. So we've taken that upon ourselves, to clean the streets and maintain the streets. And it's also a job creator for some of our residents. We have 3 residents who work as our cleaning green team ambassadors who are cleaning the neighborhood. So we do the cleaning and greening portion. And then we focus a lot on organizational sustainability. How do we stick around for, as a sustainable organization serving this community for as long as we possibly can? And then, how do we think about marketing and branding the neighborhood? What is the common vision of residents in the neighborhood, and how do we bring that to fruition? But I think one thing that sets us apart, and I think this is where I expressed the brilliance of my board early on, is that we really recognize that a lot of the things that I just described are sometimes Band-Aids on a broken system. My board from early on recognized that ownership is really the true path to wealth. It's not wage-paying jobs, it's ownership. And they recognize that, and we're seeing, this is such a part of the conversation right now, but it should have been a part of the conversation for centuries, that, the urban planning policies of our past have really stripped the opportunity for wealth building from a lot of communities in this country, from a lot of neighborhoods, particularly communities of color, Black neighborhoods, you know, whether it be redlining, you know, whether it be not providing access to credit, you know, whether it's urban renewal. You know, if you look through our history as urban planners, and I am an urban planner, and this is, you know, my history as an urban planner that I'm trying to work with this organization to flip. You know, they saw that ownership is that ownership that has been stripped away through all these policies. Gaining that back and pushing back against these policies is a way to do that. And so, you know, they've seen it. My board saw it early on that we need to create sort of social social innovation models, social enterprise models in this community where people can own the resources of the community. So whether it be, you know, community-owned energy, or whether it's community-owned or cooperatively owned agricultural systems, whether it's community land trusts where the community will own the land that is developed and be able to maintain it as affordable land over a period of time. And so they saw that early on, and they said, we need to start to develop sustainable revenue for this community. We can't be going, you know, hat in hand to foundations and donors every single year trying to get money for this community, which is what we do now. I mean, we have very generous foundations that fund us and donors, but we are trying to develop these sort of social enterprise models owned by the community to build sustainable revenue and ownership in the community. So I'm proud to say, and thanks to Lindy Institute, who recognized sort of this work early on and took me on as an urban innovation fellow and kind of supported me through some of this. You know, we launched our first locally owned company in December called Centennial Solar, which is a company that right now we've raised enough money for it that we can provide a loan product to low-income families to put solar panels on their rooftops. You know, we recognized early on that the city's efforts, the Philadelphia Energy Authority's efforts, which are great efforts to get solar across the city as much as possible, provided through their Solarize Philly program, provided a great opportunity for families to get discounted solar on their roofs, but it was still very, very expensive for low-income families without access to credit. And so in communities like East Parkside, where there's low access to credit because of these historical trends that I've talked about before, you know, this creates a loan product where they can actually, you know, these families, these households can actually use our loan product, which is a low interest loan, working with the Energy Authority, who has a grant that subsidizes it as well, to really bring low cost solar to households, low income households. So this fall we'll be doing 34, it's the pilot this fall where we'll be funding 34 solar installations on low income households throughout the city of Philadelphia. And we just hope to grow this business and think about how this ownership model, which I say locally owned right now or community owned, it's really CDC owned. But how do we shift it towards more of a cooperative model of ownership? You know, and how do we develop more businesses like this that can be cooperatively owned in the community? So, you know, I'm happy to talk more about this and dig in more throughout the conversation. I don't want to, you know, make this answer too long, but I do just want to say that at the CDC, I think that's what really sets us apart from other CDCs that I've seen, and I've studied a lot across the country, is this idea that my board came up with early on, that I then ended up writing my dissertation on as well, about this kind of community-owned social enterprise model to support the growth of the organization. I do see a question coming up about our boundaries. It's a really great question. Should have been one of the first things I said. We are in East Parkside, which is from 34th Street to the east, Belmont Avenue to the west, Fairmount Park to the north, and the Amtrak line, which goes from Philadelphia to Harrisburg to the south. So the 40th Street Bridge, 41st Street Bridge, 42nd Street Bridge, which separates us from the rest of you know, Mantua and Belmont as our southern border. We're Census Tract 110, about 3,900 residents, 2,200 households. And we have a median household income of around 16,000, I believe, last time I checked. So it just shows the extent of the poverty in this community. And you know, it's one of my board also saw early on when they founded this organization that, you know, when you're an organization, or when you're a neighborhood that sits where it does, next to Fairmount Park, you know, the largest manicured urban park in the country, next to the Philadelphia Zoo, America's first zoo. I see some folks from the zoo here. Hello. You know, you're next to Memorial Hall, which is now the Please Touch Museum. You're right off of I-76. You're, you know, short distance from major universities and hospitals, yet you're one of the poorest neighborhoods in the city. Like, there's something wrong there. You know, there's something wrong there. And so my board saw early on that there needed to be some level of leadership in the community, cohesive leadership that could speak to the powers that be, whether it be, you know, our local city government or foundations or so forth, about the disinvestment in this community, the deep level of disinvestment. And so that is how the CDUC was formed. And we see ourselves as being in one of the most strategic neighborhoods in the city of Philadelphia. And, you know, we are working to build those partnerships with the zoo, with the Please Touch Museum, with everybody around us, to try to think about how to create this neighborhood in a way that, or develop this neighborhood in a way that serves the residents that live here and creates this diverse, thriving community, as it says in our mission statement. So, Andrew, that was a really long answer to your question, but I tried to delve into every little aspect of it, and I still didn't even delve into, you know, a quarter of it. But I'll let you ask more questions so that you can kind of guide the conversation.
You got into about 3 or 4 of my questions already,
yeah.
So don't worry about it. That's great. I guess one of the things that we try to do in these urban strategy in the present tense conversations is try to understand how people's professional trajectory intersect with the work that they're doing right now. And so I know this is a joint effort between you and your board and the staff, and I wonder if you could talk about what brought you to this place, and why, maybe even hearing from some board members, why you're the right fit to lead this initiative at this time. What is the combination of urban planning and some of the international experiences you've had, and maybe some of the other things about you that sort of make you a right fit for Centennial Parkside CDC? And then maybe if you want to bring other folks into the conversation, what is it that folks saw in Chris that made it an effective fit to try to build this community wealth approach?
We might still be out of him a right fit. I don't know. I've been here for 3.5 years, hopefully. No, so we'll hear from, you know, some of my board members to see what they say. But, you know, I think I do want to like touch on something, a word that you used, Andrew, when you said to lead these initiatives. And I want to be careful with that word, because my board are the leaders of this initiatives, and I am an employee of the organization. So I feel that I have the privilege to serve this organization and to serve this community. And so while, you know, I appreciate the label as a leader of the initiatives, I want to make it clear that you know, this is a group that's leading this, and it doesn't work without it being a group leading this. If it's one person, it certainly doesn't work. And in particular, if it's one person who's not from the community. You know, I didn't grow up in East Parkside. You know, I look a lot differently than everybody in East Parkside. I have not had the same experiences. So, you know, if I tried to do this on my own as a leader, you know, I would fail miserably. So I feel fortunate to have the leadership around me of my board and of the community. There's so many leaders in this community that might not be officially affiliated with the CDC. They're showing up at every community meeting. And so, you know, they certainly are leaders, and they certainly are guiding us. But you asked about my professional trajectory, and you know, how much time do you have? Because it's been like kind of diverse and all over the place. You know, I just, complete transparency, I am 41 years old right now, and I think I've just discovered what I want to be when I grow up. And it's the job that I have right now. Like I said before, it's an urban planner's dream to be able to do this level of grassroots effort and impactful work in a community. What I see as impactful work. You know, I didn't grow up in Philadelphia. I grew up in the Harrisburg area, but I have long ties to West Philadelphia because my mom grew up in Southwest Philly. So always coming here as a kid. And so, you know, I knew Philly growing up, but, you know, never lived here. And you don't really know a city till you live there, but I at least knew some about it. I did do my undergraduate degree at Penn State, got a undergrad degree in environmental resource management. Chose my major because I like to be outside. I was just like, I like to be outside. I'll study something environmental, you know? How many of us did that going into college, not really knowing what we wanted to do? And, but, you know, it was definitely a good learning experience. then after that, I decided I wanted to go abroad and learn about other cultures, other countries. So I lived in Kenya for a year, and I taught at a school for low-income boys in Western Kenya. They actually taught me, I should say, because you go to these countries very young and naive, and think you know everything when you're 21, and then you realize you know nothing. And so that was an eye-opener for me, but I think it was also very formative. I came back and I decided I wanted to continue that kind of work. So I worked as an AmeriCorps volunteer in Harrisburg, and worked with a nonprofit there called the Joshua Group, which was my first kind of introduction to working with a small grassroots nonprofit in one of these neighborhoods that had been affected by the same discriminatory policies that we've seen here in West Philadelphia. When decided I wanted to go back to school, got my master's in Shippensburg University in geography, got really interested in urban planning at that point. But got a little restless again, decided I wanted to go abroad. So I joined the Peace Corps, and I spent 4 years in Paraguay with the Peace Corps, where I learned a lot of community organizing work. And that's where I think I really learned about being in different cultures and listening and working alongside people who already kind of had the knowledge to do what they needed to do. They just kind of needed a partner. And so, I think Peace Corps was really formative in that sense for me. Came back from there. That was back in like 2009, I guess. Did a stint in the corporate sector with a engineering firm called Michael Baker International, where I did transportation planning. It's funny because I look out my window. My office is in Fairmount Park at the Letitia House, right across from the zoo. And I look out my window and I see the Centennial Transportation Center, which is the parking garage across the street. I actually worked on that project before I even knew about the Letitia House, where my office is right now. But I was doing that as a transportation planner. And then I moved to Wisconsin with my wife. She was decided to do a medical degree at University of Wisconsin. So we moved out there, kept my job in the corporate sector as a transportation planner, but I was living, in Wisconsin, next to the University of Wisconsin, has a great urban planning program. I thought, hey, I've always thought about getting a PhD. I'm here, I might as well do it. So I started the PhD program there. Finished that PhD here in Philly 7 years after I started it. So, it took me a longer time than I know it took Andrew much shorter to get his PhD. But my wife and I ended up in Philly because my wife got into the residency program at Penn. So she did 3 years of family medicine at Penn. And fortunately, I came here working as a researcher for the University of Wisconsin, finishing my dissertation, doing research around public health and planning. Shortly after I got here, I met the president of the board of the Centennial Parkside CDC. The president at the time, his name was Christopher Scott. And he and I just found that we had a lot in common. We had a lot of common interests. And I expressed my interest in doing community-based work. I expressed that, after doing a PhD for this long, academia might not be my path. I really liked being grounded and rooted in the community, and I just felt that I couldn't do as much of that in academia as I could do working sort of in a nonprofit sector. And he said, well, guess what? We're starting this CDC. We don't have any funds to pay anybody. We don't have any staff, but we'd love for any advice you have. We'd love for you to hang out with us. And so I did for a period of time. And then the board raised enough money to hire an executive director part-time. And they asked if I would apply for the position, and it ended up just being, I was in the right place at the right time, and it was just a perfect opportunity, I felt, for me to kind of use, I'd spent a lot of time living and learning, and I felt like I had the privilege to do that. I have a certain privilege to do that, but I also felt like I had a lot of skills that I could lend. And I could work alongside a community to try to use those skills in a way that was meaningful. And this really fit the bill for me. I think there's some more questions down the line that I don't want to get into yet, Andrew, that I think you're going to ask me more about this position. But it's been a journey for me the past 3.5 years, and I expect it to be a very long journey going forward too, because I'm really happy here. Really fortunate to have the relationship with Drexel too. I do just want to say that, because it still keeps my feet in academia a little bit. You know, I still do like teaching. I still like having these sorts of conversations. And so I still do love parts of the academic side. I just really like having my feet in the community. And so that's kind of what, this is kind of my happy place right now. So, Andrew, I'll punt it back to you. Maybe, I don't know if do you want to pass it off to some board members, proof what I've said and see if it's true.
Yeah, that are on the call that want to speak to the partnership or even just speak about some of the program areas that you guys are undertaking now. I would love to open it up a little bit to hear from you all if you're feeling up to it.
Sure. Hi, this is Alexandra McFadden. I am the board president. I've been president since October, I think, 19th last year. And I've been involved with the CDC since, I think it was founded in maybe March of 2015. And I started joining in discussions as an advisory board member in maybe August of 2015, because I was doing my master's degree in public administration at Baruch College, and would send, whenever I had a class that was relevant to what was going on, please pardon the cat, was relevant to what was going on in some sort of neighborhood profile work or whatever, I'd do all the research necessary to keep my feet in the water. Moved away to Cleveland and was still involved, and realized I wanted to be back in Philadelphia in my neighborhood, making a difference. Sorry, cat. One of the things that we loved about Chris from the beginning was that we talked about this last night, he's kind of a unicorn, right? We had this guy who was getting his PhD in urban planning, who was willing to go on this very entrepreneurial journey with us. And we didn't know what that was going to look like. And we had Christopher Scott used to work in solar energy financing. And so he really wanted us to take advantage of creating a revenue generating model that would allow us to not just make money in the community and to help address some of the racial wealth gap that Black communities particularly face in America, but also to help insulate us away from any sort of funding changes in the universe. And so finding someone who was able to, who was interested in stepping into this very entrepreneurial, very bizarre role. I think, I can't even remember how many hours it was the first few months, and also could help direct from the conversations that we were having about what using a solar energy generation revenue model would look like, was kind of amazing. So we were so happy that Chris was in this place and in this space while we were trying to ourselves learn what we wanted our CDC to become. And we've been extraordinarily grateful to have him as a part of this. I talk to Chris almost as often as I talk to my best friend. He was on vacation about a month or so ago, and I went through a little bit of withdrawal because I didn't talk to him for like 6 days. And I didn't know what that world was like. I'm like, wait, I can't call Chris. What am I supposed to do? I can't call Chris. But we tend to work very, very closely. Board members, we have, and programming, we have a program committee, a programming manager who does amazing work with our youth development, with working, there's a bunch of intergenerational work that she does. We have sunset stories in which older neighbors tell stories to younger community members who are, kids. Our Young Black Men's Initiative, where young Black men speak to older Black men and they get to have conversations about things that are difficult in their lives. We have an internship as well as all kinds of programming, from financial literacy to arts and culture and things that kids are working on, as well as we have Fresh Food Fest. And these are it's interesting watching Tasha turn these into digital offerings, because she's had to be very nimble to do all of this. Chris mentioned our ambassador program. We also have a greening committee. Our greening chair, Ryan Schuman, is on the call as well. And you can talk about all of our planting initiatives and what it's like to green and beautify our spaces. We also just recently bought a new property. I could go on, but you're getting the point that we have a lot of diverse offerings. And Chris is the linchpin that holds us all together, as we have our 8, maybe 9. My mom has not so full disclosure, my mother's on the board. So if anyone has had any idea of what that's like to be in a working role with their parents, you have my sympathies. But my mom is going to be resigning soon. And so right now we have 9 members of the board, but we will soon have 8 again. But yeah, we love Chris. I've often said in the event he wins Powerball, he has to continue coming to work because we will not replace him.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. It's amazing to see an organization that is so united around kind of community problem solving and opportunity seeking and entrepreneurship in a way where I see that this board and this staff are really kind of united around these goals. And I think it's really an inspiration for a lot of communities that may be more fragmented or more, certainly struggling. And one of the things that I want to hear more about the programmatic offerings and the sort of community wealth building offerings, but I also want to leave time to talk about the massive effect that we've seen from the pandemic on some of those plans and how you've been able to adapt. I know you guys have taken on a number of new programs or transition programs in response to that. So if you guys, Chris or Alexandra or other staff, wanted to speak to just the nature of COVID and its effect on the grand plans to build community wealth in East Parkside, I'm sure that it hasn't stopped those plans, but it has certainly created an effect on them, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'll happily start this. I may punt to Alexandra a little bit because she has really been a great leader in this, as well as our program manager Tasha, who's on the line here too. COVID really, there's so much I can talk about with COVID. But as an organization, it really it caused us to temporarily. I say temporarily, we don't know how long it's going to be, that temporariness or that temporariness, because we don't know what's going to happen with COVID. We don't know what's going to happen next week. But, as soon as this hit, it really laid bare for our community the challenges and the lack of investment in the community over the years, because you immediately saw food insecurity, which I think was always there. It just became a lot more obvious. If you look at our community, we have a lot of essential workers who were no longer able to work, or, essential workers would mean they would be working, but, essential workers who were working during this period, who maybe got sick, or people who were laid off because they weren't considered essential. There was a real lack of that, what I said before, wealth does not come from earning wages. Wealth comes from ownership, from owning your home, from owning, your business, from owning those sorts of things. And so when people started to lose work and lose jobs, it hit our neighborhood very, very hard. And so I remember we just had a board meeting this past Monday, and I made a comment to my board that it felt very optimistic because our last board meeting, which was in March, was right when COVID hit. And we said, what are we going to do? Like, we have people who are starving. We have people who are losing jobs. We are very vulnerable to this disease. And so we needed to shift to what we call meeting basic necessities in the community, which is not really if you look at our mission and vision, like, we're thinking broadly, we're thinking about the grander vision, the development of the neighborhood. We're not thinking about running a food pantry normally, but now we are. And so we immediately shifted to running a food pantry. Thank goodness we closed on our new building the end of February, right before COVID hit, because that building is right smack in the middle of the neighborhood. And it's desperately in need of a lot of renovation, which we're working on. I actually see someone from the architecture firm, Brightcom, who's with us here. Jordan is on with us, who's helping us design the building as it should be, whenever we get to that phase of construction. It is, we use the building as kind of what I started to call our emergency response site, because our current office is in Fairmount Park. It's a little difficult to get to. It's not right in the middle of the neighborhood. People can't walk up and get a whole bunch of food and then walk home at our current office. So we opened up our new office as an emergency response area. And, thanks to some of my board members, specifically Alexandra, who's on here, and Lorraine Gomez, who's not on here, but is a mover and shaker both here and at Mount Vernon Manor CDC. They rounded up a bunch of food donations from different organizations, from the Catholic Diocese of Philadelphia, from Brandywine Realty Trust, who stepped up and started to buy food from their restaurant tenants who weren't open and donate all that food to the CDC from the Share Food program. And we started to distribute food every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And it was, Alexander, how many meals a week did we get up to? 2,500 a week?
It was 2,100 meals per week and 10,800 tons of produce.
Mm-hmm.
At one point. Like there was about 5 weeks where that was like consistently. Then we ramped down away from the prepared meals, and now we focus on the produce.
Mm-hmm. And so, it really opened our eyes to the challenges around poverty in this neighborhood. And I think it strengthened our resolve around building, ownership of the resources. The reason we're in this situation is because of decades of disinvestment in this community. And we didn't really see that change when COVID hit. We turned to the city for some help, and we didn't get a lot because the common response was, well, you don't really have the civic infrastructure in your neighborhood for us to set up a food distribution site there. Well, that to us wasn't a great answer, because the reason we don't have that civic infrastructure is because of the disinvestment over the decades. So because we don't have the civic infrastructure, we shouldn't be the ones that have to suffer even more. We do feel fortunate, though. I think our new council person, Jamie Gaudier, did step up and advocated a lot for us to the city agencies and so forth. And I think she worked closely with the Share Food program to make sure that started up for us. So there were advocates within city government for us, but we just didn't feel like the civic structure was there to really provide. We kind of fell off the deep end when COVID hit because the civic infrastructure wasn't there yet. We do feel very fortunate that we have partners at the zoo and the Please Touch Museum. Recently they have definitely stepped in, and the Please Touch Museum put together a backpack program for the kids in the neighborhood. So we just distributed 100 backpacks and with tons of materials in them for kids. Kids are out of school. They were out of school before summer started for months, and many of them may not have had the intellectual stimulus that they need. And so the Please Touch Museum recognized that. They recognized they couldn't open up their doors because of COVID. So they're going to reach out to the community and just give resources to the community in the form of educational resources, which is where their expertise is. The zoo, just opened back up, and they said, we got to get free tickets out to the community. And that was one of the first things they did when they opened, was give free tickets to the community. They didn't, go right to their, the people that necessarily bring in a lot of their revenue and cater to them right away. They actually went to the community first. And so we really appreciate those partners that we have. We just recognize we have a lot of work to do to really, number one, I'll go back to that concept of ownership, build that ownership in this community of our resources, so that when we have the wealth and we have the support within the community, so that when the next pandemic hits, or when global climate change hits and we're pushing back against that, we're not going to fall off the deep end again. And then we have a lot of advocacy to do with the city to really step in and step up to help with, providing some of the civic infrastructure we need in this city, whether it be in this neighborhood, whether it be a functioning rec center, which we don't have, a functioning library, which we don't have, all of these things that we just aren't in East Parkside. We need to continue to work on. And one other thing I want to be, say about COVID is that we do a lot of programming. We do a lot of arts and culture programming. We do a lot of, fresh food access programming, fitness programming, all the things that are really, really, really hard to do in COVID when you can't get together, But we have an amazing program manager, Tasha, who's on here, who does that, who organizes that. And she within a second switched so much stuff over to virtual programming and focused it primarily on our youth, which are the ones who we saw falling through the cracks the most during COVID, because they're not in school, they're not having that kind of, intellectual stimulus they need. They're not having that socialization they need. So she shifted our financial literacy program online, and we did a whole financial literacy program on Zoom with our youth. She started, once we saw I'll use the term that Mike O'Brien used on the last one of these talks. When the uprisings and rebellions came to the city, she immediately turned to the youth and said, we need to be supportive of you Black men in this community who need to have a voice. And so we're going to start to have these no foul, no fear conversations. And Tasha, I'm not even doing it justice, everything that you do justice, but, and started to plan around how can we, you know, share power with our young Black youth during this time when there's a lot of pent up frustration, rightfully so. And how can we make that constructive, and how can we make for systematic change with our youth? And she, you know, she did an amazing job of doing it all online, which is really hard to do, you know? And so I just want to give credit to everybody, you know, at my organization for being able to make this shift. Because like I said, our board meeting on Monday felt so much more optimistic than it did, you know, in March, because we kind of had hit our stride, and it was hard, and it's still hard. And we still have a lot of challenges in the community. It's going to get, I think, worse before it gets better from an economic standpoint. And so we need to continue to have the resolve around building community wealth for, you know, so we can avoid future disasters, but we also need to also meet those basic needs, which is a really hard balance to strike. But I think with our team, and not only our board and staff, but with the volunteers in this community who stepped up, like we have such a huge volunteer group that helps out every Monday and Thursday now giving out food. We have a couple of residents doing Play Streets programs where they're closing down their streets, which is a Philadelphia Parks and Rec program, you know, and creating a safe space for the kids to play on the streets because the kids have no pools to go to this summer. A lot of them don't have summer programs to go to. So there's just so much great energy in the community right now, despite all the challenges presented to us by COVID. I don't know if, you know, anybody on my board wants to add anything to that. Alexandra, I said I was going to punt it off to you because you've led a lot of these efforts, not most of them, but yeah.
The one thing I wanted to add, and I'm glad you mentioned the rebellion. I like that term, the rebellion, the uprisings. Something Kimberly Jones had mentioned. She said one of the reasons why people like rioting is the voice of the unheard and looting happened because our ShopRite and the entire plaza got looted, which is where a lot of people in the community do their shopping for everything from groceries to hair stuff and Lowe's and stuff. But Kimberly Jones says we don't own anything. And that's why people are burning it down. Like, you know, you play this game Monopoly for 400 years, you can't acquire any wealth. You finally do get wealth and people start burning it. So in many ways, the riots were a response to all of this. But when we can move to ownership, community-based ownership, wealth generation, wealth creation for people, it changes things. It changes the entire equation for making America, or at least in our case, Parkside, it makes it more secure against rebellion, right? Because if people are able to participate in both the economy, but a society that has a place for them, and it's a place where they know that they own things. And, you know, looking at COVID, how dangerous and insecure a lot of people's fortunes are right now. We're moving toward that. And that's one of the reasons I think people have been so amazing at volunteering. There's a sense that we are in this together. And so I've seen more community engagement working, the results of it, the fruits of it now than I ever have. And I'm just so beloved. I love the people in my neighborhood so much, even when they're setting off fireworks.
I want to come back to this idea of partnerships, because I think it takes partnerships to make this work happen, whether it's the emergency response work or it's the long-term planning for community wealth. And we had a couple of questions come in from Barry Becker this morning that basically asked this question about partnerships. And I'll rephrase the question just in light of what we've already discussed to say, looking beyond COVID, what are some of the partnerships for the organization that you feel most excited about? And where are you seeing new opportunity, you know, either with specific partners or with a structure or an idea of partnership that you could see helping you to achieve some of these longer term goals?
Sorry, I had to take myself off of mute there for a second. This work is all about partnerships. We are an organization of 5 staff members, 1 full-time staff member and 4 part-time staff members. We are an organization with 9 board members, sorry, Alexandra, who work their tail off, but have other jobs. This is not their full-time job. They're more involved than most boards I've experienced in my life. And so we don't have the capacity to do all the work that we do on our own. It requires partnerships, and frankly, it's silly to do work without partnerships, because if everybody's running around doing things on their own and working in silos, you're really just, duplicating and unnecessarily replicating work that's being done someplace else, or it could be done, more efficiently in a partnership. And so I think, Barry's question was, what are some of, the new partnerships? I think I'll first just touch on the fact that, it is through partnerships with organizations like the Fairmount Park Conservancy, who have been a dedicated partner to us from day one, through partnerships with foundations like the Knight Foundation, who have been with us since day one, the William Penn Foundation, who have been with us since day one, through Brandywine Realty Trust, who chose us to start to kind of figure out their community engagement strategy. How are they going to invest meaningfully in communities? To Drexel and the Lindy Institute, who came on early on as a partner, to a recent, there's just so many partnerships. The Philadelphia Zoo, who has been with us since day one with representation on our board. We're constantly brainstorming with them about how the zoo can be the best community partner that they can be. And I really appreciate them reaching out to us to ask those questions and to include us, because they've been around a heck of a lot longer than we have, but they still are humble enough to reach out and say, how can we be a good, community partner, and how can we strategize around these business models that we talk about? We've talked to them about solar, we've talked to them about agriculture. We haven't quite gotten there yet on them, but they're conversations that aren't going to end anytime soon. The Please Touch Museum has been a long-term partner through their kind of their community advisory committee, where we all meet once a month, and they listen to the community, and they provide resources to the community in the forms of access to the museum. And their backpack program recently was just amazing, an amazing initiative. And so, I see I see exciting new partnerships right here in the community with our institutions like the zoo and the Please Touch Museum. I think we're really early on in the potential that we have to think about this sort of Centennial district and what it looks like, and how, we've talked about the Centennial district forever, but we haven't really seen a lot of new investment in the neighborhood coming from this whole branding of the Centennial district. So how do we make the Centennial district really meaningful for our community and for our residents? And I think those partnerships, and just seeing the zoo and the Please Touch step up during this time and help us and think with us, I think is hopefully a foreshadowing for when we come out of COVID, what those relationships are going to look like. And then we have, some really exciting, like I said, we need to kind of keep our eye on our long-term vision, even though we're really focused on the day-to-day now. So, we entered a phase right before COVID where we were feeling real good about ourselves. We were like, you're 5 years in, we've raised a bunch of money. We're ready to start doing some, we've done a ton of community engagement. We've really built a cohesive vision with the community. Now we're ready to start, putting a stake in the ground and start doing some bricks and mortar work and starting to think about reducing this blight and, reducing some of these vacant lots and so forth in the community. And so we started to form some really interesting real estate partnerships. And then COVID hit, and we were scared to death that they were going to be put on hold or they were going to disappear. And frankly, they haven't. They've continued at a slower pace. We bought a building. We expect it to be, probably further along in our design than we were right now. Our architects, I see some of them on here, have been very patient with us in terms of our multiple, demands on us that make us a little slower to respond. But, we formed we're exploring some opportunities, with Shift Capital in the neighborhood. They've shown some interest in sort of mentoring us around real estate development, because they've done some really meaningful development in Kensington. So we're thinking about how can we replicate that model elsewhere. So we're talking to them about that a little bit. And so I see some potential there. Brandywine Realty Trust has been a strong partner to us leading up to COVID is continuing to be a strong partner and helping us think strategically around what does, a private sector partner like Brandywine, what does it look like when they start to make investments in equitable development? How can they strengthen the neighborhoods around their huge Schuylkill Yards projects so that those neighborhoods aren't adversely affected by Schuylkill Yards through sort of displacement? How do they be a responsible partner in that? And so these are going to continue, these relationships. They might be slower than they are now, but they're going to continue. And I think it's also important to think about some partnerships that are we've been around for a little while, but are being renewed through our work around Civic Commons. So we have the Strawberry Mansion CDC, who has been a long partner to us. We are a partner with them in an initiative called the Civic Commons Initiative, which is an initiative by a lot of large foundations across the country, in the Fairmount Park Conservancy, in the Philadelphia Parks and Rec Department, to think about the future of public spaces. And so, they're investing in public spaces in Strawberry Mansion, in East Parkside, in Bartram's Garden. And we are all partners to think about what does the future of public spaces look like to the Civic Commons, especially now during COVID, when that's pretty critical. So, and I think it's also important to think about CDCs. Oftentimes we work in silos, Philadelphia's very territorial, as we all know, what neighborhood are you from, and so I think we are also trying to break down those silos with other CDCs. So we share, a neighborhood advisory committee with Mount Vernon Manor CDC. And so we're trying to, work across boundaries of whether it's to Strawberry Mansion, whether it's to Mantua, whether it's to Belmont, whether it's to West Parkside, so that we're not all working in our own silos. And so I think those partnerships have grown during COVID, frankly, because we're all trying to meet the same demands and we're all trying to do it together. So, guys, I could go on and on about partnerships because it really is what makes us successful. But I know we're probably getting short on time here, Andrew, so I want to be respectful of that.
Yeah, we do have about 5 minutes left for questions, and I've noticed that there have been a couple questions coming through in the chat that Alexandra has done a great point of responding to. And so I encourage everybody to look over at the chat when they're not looking at Chris to see what's going on there about the Neighborhood Advisory Committee and about Strawberry Mansion CDC. I just want to see if anybody else has any questions that they want to ask to Chris or Alexandra or other folks on the call. You can put them right in the chat. And while we're waiting for those questions to come in, Chris, I wonder if you could just do some little highlight, lowlight. I love stories and I love hearing about moments that really taught you something about how to do this work. And so if anything comes to mind for you, a moment, a community meeting, a meeting with a funder, some kind of teachable moment that people on the call can learn from, and just your own development into this work, since you've, as you said, come at it from many different kinds of experience. What's a kind of something that stands out to you?
There are so many moments that stand out to me. And I want to talk about one that, and I want to connect it to neighborhood resilience. We're all about neighborhood resilience. We're in resilience during a time of COVID. We have some amazing volunteers in our community. There are two volunteers in particular that I want to highlight. Their names are Roberta and Alfonso Connor. And Roberta is running the Play Streets program on Sloan Street right now. She's out there every day with the fire hydrant open, the kids playing, keeping them cool. And Alfonso shows up at our food share program, our food distribution program, every single time. And we had an incident where he was carrying a box recently and he tripped and fell and hit his head. And he actually had to go to the hospital and get checked out for a concussion, to make sure he was okay, and so forth. And I didn't expect to see him for a while. And then I went back the next food distribution program and he was sitting there waiting for everybody to show up so he could distribute food. And it just shows the resilience of our community. He fell and he hurt himself to the point where he had to go to the hospital to get checked out. But he came back the next day. No, it wasn't the next day. I think he had a weekend to recover, but he was back. And, I told him to go home. I said, you got to go home. You got to rest. He's like, nope, I'm doing this for the community. We're one community. We're working together. And, we saw a lot of this, we saw a lot of this resiliency, this personal resiliency prior to COVID, but it's come out even more during COVID. And so I think what it also reflects, and this is a credit to my board and my staff and to our organization, that one of the most important things a CDC can do is build trust in the community, because you can't get anything done without trust. Even if you're a CDC with a board from the community, when you're the new kids on the block, people are going to start to question what you're doing. This neighborhood's seen so many false promises over the years. And then frankly, they see an organization with the executive director as a white male coming in, and there's also going to be a trust factor, because who are if you look at our history, Black communities have not been treated very well by white men very often. And so to build, to see that our residents are coming together around the CDC in this way and helping and serving each other and working to make this a better community as a united community, because it wasn't always like that. And we still have a lot of work to do. I'm not saying we've solved all those issues, but I think that just shows, that the work we put in around community engagement and building trust is paying off. And there is that trust and there is that commitment from the community to support our work. And so I think Alfonso, and I have to just raise him up as someone who is a leader in this community and a leader in terms of a resilient community. So that's my story of the day. So
I could offer a story for any given day. I mean, the kinds of resilience and joy and struggle that any neighborhood like East Parkside, with all of its particular special characteristics, undergoes is something that we can all watch and learn from. I've been struck in this conversation as I begin to wrap up, this idea of the short term and the long term, the long game and the immediate needs of a community. And what you talked about, Chris, was this idea that these challenges weren't built over a day, they were built over decades. And they are, the result of government policy and urban planning and deliberate neglect and deliberate racism. And to overcome them requires both new thinking and entrepreneurship and imagination, but it also requires reckoning with the reality of the everyday, that it's not going to be, every day is not a story of shift capital and the Philadelphia Zoo and everybody from Brandywine coming together to reimagine the neighborhood. On some days, it's about getting food into people's hands so that they can eat that day. And the work that you all are doing at Centennial Parkside CDC, I think, is really inspiring, because it meets needs of residents in both those domains. You're not thinking about either one or the other. And I do believe that the work is just beginning for this community. And I think if we had another hour, we could talk about your ambitions to do community wealth building through solar, through agriculture, through land trusts. And I encourage people to seek out Alexandra and Chris and others, and we'll post links after the conversation is over on how to get in touch with folks, just to learn more about this model and to get involved. So I'm going to say a word about the Urban Strategy Program in a minute, but I want to sort of conclude this part of the call by just thanking you, Chris, and thanking you, Alexandra, and others who are making this neighborhood strong and resilient in the face of all of its many challenges and opportunities. So thank you all.
thank you. Thanks everybody for joining us. And like Andrew said, this conversation continues. And so feel free to reach out to us at any moment if you want to learn more about anything we talked about. And I'd love to hear from you guys too, because I feel like we have so much to learn from everybody on this call, like I said in the beginning. So thanks for hosting. Andrew Harris, I see you on. Thank you for hosting as part of Lindy. Appreciate it.
And speaking of learning, that's a great segue for me. We call this series Urban Strategy in the present tense, because we do offer a master's degree in urban strategy at Drexel that is a 2-year, 48-credit master's program that is, in essence, if I had to put it in a nutshell, is basically aspiring to train the kind of people like Chris and Alexandra to solve the kind of problems that neighborhoods like East Parkside face. And it's a program that brings together urban planning, public health, economics, history, sociology, civil engineering, sustainability and resilience, community engagement. It is more than urban planning. It is more than any one of those things, and tries to sort of exist at the interstitial moment between all of those disciplines to try to train the leaders of tomorrow and today to think through how to carefully take on the mantle of responsibility for our communities and to really build power in those communities alongside the people who are most severely impacted by decades of disinvestment, but also have many opportunities to grow through that process. So if you'd like to learn more about the Masters in Urban Strategy at Drexel, my information will be in our follow-up email. I want to thank everybody out for coming onto the call and staying with us throughout the hour, and we will be back with another edition of Urban Strategy in the present tense in the fall. But everyone enjoy, please, the rest of your summer. Stay healthy, stay safe, stay close, and stay in touch. So thank you all very much.